So the last speaker we have today is from a very interesting company, Soulmate. I think a lot of people will learn something different today instead of technology, data, and hardware. So I'd like to invite Kai to come up and talk to us about data scientists.
Is this on? Well, perfect. I don't know how many people, probably most, don't know anything about Soulmates.ai. There's a website. How many people have heard of the Eisenberg Group? Excellent. There is somebody in the room. That's fantastic. So the Eisenberg Group is a 25-year-old. It's probably one of the very largest, what used to be called advertising agencies on the West Coast, independent, not rolled up into a conglomerate. I think all of you have seen the work, though. All of the shiny Microsoft HoloLens videos when they launched the platforms, those were all made in Pasadena. Multi-Clio winning, fantastic organization. So how does that sort of organization now talk about AI? And so I want to take you on that journey because it's really, really interesting. I assume this is the clicker. And we had a couple of time series slides that went back. We will go back further than all of those because it's all going to be about a massive change, a societal change in communication that has happened. And I don't think I can get there without going all the way back to, at least in the Western world, the dawn of mass media. When, before the 1440s, you needed a hammer, you knew where to go in your town because there was a smith that would have a piece of metal and stick a handle into. You had that relationship. There was a direct relationship between the people making things and the people buying things. But obviously, as cities and towns grew, as everybody flew from, fled the land and came into larger and larger groups of people in towns and cities, that wasn't scalable. So Gutenberg came up with movable type and launched mass media. And all of a sudden, for the first time in the history of mankind, we had a unidirectional communication structure. You say something and many people listening. Before that, it was, before it wasn't rooms like this. Okay, in churches, it was rooms like this. That was the microscopic version of that. But before that, when you had a conversation, you were talking. We were talking and could immediately react. Gutenberg changed that. All of a sudden, we launched an age of communication that is really one way. And it allowed people to figure out, living in cities, they wanted to build a hammer. They looked in their local newspaper advertising section and figured out where to go to get a hammer. So the supply of the people making things and the people consuming things were disconnected. 564 years pass. Nothing changes of that paradigm. How many industries do you know that nothing changes in 564? Nothing fundamental. Yes, we build tools and stuff and we get better, but we launched a term back here called the impression that we use in paid media today. That is unheard of. How many industries have a metric that goes back over 500 years? There was a massive change about 13 years ago because consumers are starting to talk in a way that they've never talked before because there was no means, no way of harnessing that talk. Massive amounts of data was produced by end users and ended up also here, but in social networks. So the dawn of social networks isn't just a phenomenon that you're fighting with your kids over dinner. Please put that phone down. It's a phenomenon that will have a massive impact on every single one of our industries. Because there's authentic speech. They talk about the things they want to speak about. They self-organize. Cohorts are being grouped. Interest groups are being organized. And not on we've talked a lot about enterprise class technology. This is societal class technology. My last visit up at Facebook, I was asking an engineer, so what is your biggest challenge right now? The next billion. The next billion users. You know, this is, I came through the ERP side, been in IT a long time. A billion users, we got really nervous around 100,000. But a billion users, just absolutely shocking. All right, so there is a data well out there producing about several petabytes an hour of actual speech that human beings talk about, whatever they want to talk about, including your companies, your products, etc. What do? You need to find some sort of way of listening into that conversation if you want to have any sort of prayer to insert yourself into that conversation. We believe that boils down, and that's what we're working on, 3 fundamental dimensions. I'm sure there are many other ways of handling this. We are honing in on these 3. We think it's really important to figure out what people are talking about. This is knowledge graph tethering. This is the realm of data scientists. This is applied mathematics, figuring out statistical models to map that to semantic trees or definitions of knowledge, so that you can overhear somebody talking about a 911, and you figure out that it's not an event, but it's a sports car, and it's a German sports car, and it has to do with, you know, that whole area of lifestyle, even though cars are never mentioned. Cryptic. If you think speech is hard, I mean, how many people have worked in NLP or have done some sort of semantic technology or natural language? Hard, right? Social speech, oh my God. It's not language, right? It is a very, very interesting subgenre of language that when my 24-year-old daughter talks to her friends, I find it very, very hard to understand. When I see her text to her friends, I'm completely baffled. So a lot of NLP, before we can use, in the beginning we thought we can use things like general purpose infrastructure like IBM Watson. IBM Watson has pioneered the idea of a generalized AI engine that you feed something in. You don't need to know about the training data and you get a result out. Great idea. It's a really tough one because anybody in machine learning? Data sets, training sets matter, right? Because you bring in bias, you bring in all kinds of preconceived notions. So some general purpose engines out there that give you, for example, assessment of what people are talking about, or let's say personality type, are trained on romance novels. How close is that to social speech? I mean, how close is that to anything? But there's a big corpus. A big corpus is labeled data. It's easy to get to, so your data scientists will use it. So the what? Tethering. So the nice thing is there are a lot of great infrastructures out there that put human knowledge into places. Wikipedia is obviously a really big example. So knowledge tethering, in our case, is actually tethering those nodes together based on doing some NLP translation and making social speech understandable, and tethering that. So that gives us in the best case, we have a semblance of a clue of what the conversation is about. One dimension. The next dimension is where. And this is not geography, because guess what? On social media, geography doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. That concept is just not there. People talk to each other, they might not be on the same continent. They share a language, but they might not be on the same continent. And propagation patterns, we'll get to that in a moment, are really not bounded, which in the advertising world, this is a really hard concept, which is ruled by demographics. You want to hit this region, and you want to hit this particular persona with your message. That doesn't work on social media, because they are not organized in geographic sessions, but they are organized into another graph, who they are following and who are following them. And those are contextually sensitive. It matters, like your friends that are interested in cars are different from your friends that are interested in some of the travel that you might be doing, and vice versa. So already you see these are not independent dimensions. They overlap quite a bit. So the where is really figuring out where in that social fabric the connections are, the followers and the following. This, of course, brings us to a completely sideways sort of entry, which we found that the scientists that we have and starting to work on this are not sufficient. It is no longer the world of applied math, where you can say, okay, let's see how the clustering works, how these groups fall together. You have things like propagation patterns. You know, we call things going viral on social media, and they are. Those are propagation patterns which we know from a completely different industry and completely different science, the science of epidemiology, where you track down how disease progressions happen. So we thought, oh, fantastic idea. Let's bring an epidemiologist in and help us with that. And then we found out, oh, some slight challenges. Epidemiology is the science of tiny data sets. They hunt down to the hospital door, which they think was touched when that transmission happened. These are small sample sets. And we set our epidemiologists in front of it. Here's 50 terabytes. Go at it. It's like, the tools aren't there, but the thinking. So it takes a lot of translation. But you know what? Epidemiology is the right science to help with that, because all of the mathematical tools that they have developed over the umpty generations of that science being practiced really, really help. But I think you already see where I'm going. We start with a data problem. We have engineers at it. Then we have a data scientist. And then we run into areas where the data scientist won't be enough. We have to bring in other sciences. Now, you do all of that in an organization where all of the other people around you are 3D artists and Photoshop artists and incredibly creative copywriters. So interesting challenge to bridge those gaps. Very, very cool environment, though, when you bring those completely different disciplines together and allow everybody to talk. You come up with always more ideas and better ideas. And then we get into like the next dimension, which is really, really, really critical for us. Once you figure out where these people are and what they're talking about, who are they? And this is an area where I was completely green, because coming from my background, psychology was not a real, like, statistically validatable science. I was completely wrong about that, but that was my thinking going in. So we met up with the chief scientists that built the original algorithms for eHarmony, which is where our name comes from, Soulmates. Because if you want to do matching, you need to understand what these people are. What these people are like as personalities. So, psychometrics is what we fell onto. The science of really identifying whether you can quantize and quantify a personality. And it turns out clinical psychology actually has a real scientific measurement system. They started a lot of you probably heard of the Big Five or Ocean Model. Let's not talk about Myers-Briggs or things like that. Those are more pseudoscience because they conflate a couple of things. But the next generation after the Big Five, the Ocean Model, is the Hexaco Model, which adds another dimension. And Galen Buckwalter, our scientist on that, just blew my mind, opened a whole world that with only 17 pages of survey, you can pinpoint somebody's personality. So then, of course, was the question, Galen, we don't have the ability to send 4 billion people on social networks 17 pages of survey and expect them to fill them out. But we have this, take a look. So all of the work there is bridging the gap and actually seeing what we can extract, whether we get signal to like above the noise ratio on defining personality type just from the social media, so the social data, the posts that we can actually ingest. And we can. It's amazing. We can actually get to signal. Is it as good as a 17-page survey and following them for a while? Of course not. Is it better than absolutely nothing? Massively better. Now, if you can do that for the individual, shouldn't you be able to do that for cohorts and really figure out how these group dynamics work and how those propagation patterns work? So this is the problem we're going after. This is what we're doing. And the problem space there is that I've blurred a little bit of that since A, it's probably proprietary, and secondarily, not really that. So this is all ETL. You probably all heard about ETL, pumping data in large quantities into. Yeah, we're definitely in the fuzzy domain. But what I would like to highlight is the top piece, which is take an engineering-oriented organization and blend social scientists and other scientists into that. What processes are you going to use? And this might not seem extremely applicable to everybody in the room, but understanding the consumers, even though you might be in a B2B space, but understanding what consumers are thinking, talking about, how they're talking about your products or your client's products, your customer products, it's going to affect all of us. Blending actual science into, now that we have big data and oh my God, what are we doing with it? Yes, we can write reports, we can run lots of statistics, and as you reminded me, statistics is an imminently manipulatable discipline. There is more we need to do to actually understand and dig a little deeper. We'll all have to start blending science into what we're doing on technology. And I just want to highlight the process that we came up with and how we're working on this. So we're pumping data, everything ends up with here in like data lake, data warehouse, whatever you want to call it. Then we have this is the area where our scientists work. They look at existing knowledge structures, ontologies, like the Wikipedia model, for example, for the knowledge graph, or where they don't exist, build them from scratch with tools like, I hate to say it because it's a horrifyingly bad tool, but it's the best we have, Protégé from Stanford for first-order logic encapsulation, so building ontologies. Anyway, might be getting a little too deep, but figuring out, well, if you have knowledge, if you have a way that you actually understand something like, for example, the Hexaco Model, which unravels the personality type, you need to somehow encapsulate it so that the machines can understand it and you can run models against, and you can build models with them. So knowledge engineering is a huge piece which, unfortunately, as an industry, we just have made pitiful efforts and pitiful progress over the last like 20, 30 years. Lots of areas to go. But we have made phenomenal progress on machine learning and the speed of actually running models. We heard earlier today, I can just buy a couple of servers, spin them up, run models, and then poof, let them go away. You wouldn't be able to do any of this if you didn't have that. Because if you needed to actually set up a compute cluster in the way that there are people from JPL here, you guys have to do it all the time. There is no startup that would survive anything like that. And of course, another piece that happened thanks to the gamers and then cryptocurrency, graphics processing has gotten so incredibly cheap. Without the progress of the last 4 years, this would not be something anybody should try. Now, it's actually doable. Building models, running them through like an EMR or like a Spark infrastructure against your entire data set to actually get signal to noise for these pieces. And then, of course, the end product is some sort of search system where you can actually look for what is this personality type with those interests and who are these people on social media, so you can actually go in, dig in, and look for them. But I don't want to go much further because I think if I did it halfway okay, you should all have questions. And let's open this up a little bit because I think that'll be fun. Thank you.
So you mentioned the pseudoscience of popular assessments.
Right.
You mentioned the pseudoscience of
Myers-Briggs,
popular assessment,
yeah.
Myers-Briggs and so forth. And just drawing attention to the rise of legitimate journal refereed positive psychology. Marty Seligman out of University of Pennsylvania, and so forth. And part of the reason back there was that there was no research in positive psychology because pharmaceutical companies can't make money on selling pharmaceuticals to healthy people.
Right.
But the interesting thing here is now with the ability to go in and do very cheap research, what's the value of positive psychology in a commercially driven area with cheap ability to do cheap research?
So in our case, of course, it's marketing and figuring out with the advent of social networks, companies, brands, figured out that, oh, if I just work with this YouTube artist, my message will come out. But everybody started working with YouTube artists, and guess what? Like, there's the same 5,000 people working for virtually everybody out there. In a long tail that is ludicrously long, we're working with the the head of the tail, just 5,000 people. The whole idea was, and of course there's another danger, as everybody probably saw the announcements of PewDiePie breaking up their relationship with Disney because of, oh my God, what was the guy thinking? Those became transactional relationships. So working with a guy that's worked on eHarmony, like the analogy for us was very, very quick. We're not interested in these one-time transactional, may I say, Tinder sort of transaction between your brand and the, because our internal, not official tagline is, your brand is too valuable for a bad one-night stand. You want to build a long-term relationship with somebody who matches your brand's personality profile. Because guess what? Brands have personality too. Brands have actually multiple personalities, and I don't mean that necessarily in that sense, but if you think about it, the brand has a personality it wants to exude. That's the aspirational. This is who we think we are. That's how we present ourselves. Then they execute on that, and the audience sees something that might not be the same thing as the aspirational, right? The executed personality. Then you have the personality that people receive from what you see, a third personality. And then, of course, you have the personality of all of the audiences looking at that personality that your brand is trying to muster. So you have 4 vectors that you need to triangulate to understand how a brand's personality fits with the consumer base, with the customers. Did I answer a little bit of it?
It's a complex and exciting space, and now that you can get practical access to it, it's scary exciting.
Well, it's scary because, we all heard of probably a company called Cambridge Analytica, which came out of some research from Cambridge, which had some level of influence in the last election. This was a huge motivator for our team. By the way, if I need our team, our engineers, our scientists to stay over the weekend, I say, remember the last election. And they all stay because they're all very motivated. It shouldn't be some evil empire or some dark, silent, secret society that uses this sort of technology. It should be completely open, and we should, as an industry and as a society, really start coming up with rules of engagements for this, because we're opening phenomenal, deep Pandora's boxes with actually understanding people at scale. And I think we need to be very, very careful in how we use that in the future.
Kai, first of all, thank you so much to you and to the other speakers today. I think this has been a fantastic program cutting across a lot of diverse components. Question about your model. I assume somewhere in here you have a self-learning component where you've taken the results and validated them for accuracy and then fed those results back in. How does that look and how does that work?
Yeah, so the feedback loop is very, very important. You want to make the system learnable, but there are 2 massive schools out there of how AI can be built. There's which hardly has any followers anymore, unfortunately. It's the top-down model. You define actually what you know and figure out whether you can tether everything to it. And then there's the Google model. Everybody remembers Google Flu Trends, which is a fantastic predictor of flu outbreaks based on what people were searching. You haven't heard about Google Flu Trends for a while, right? It just stopped working because it was a deep learned model. Nobody had any way of introspecting that model and understand why it worked in the first place, and it was self-enforcing. And one day, literally one day, something changed, nobody knows what, and it just stopped working altogether. That's why you haven't heard of Google Flu Trends. So that's the bottom-up model, like just deep learning everything, just finding patterns and then trusting that you find the right patterns. What we're trying to do is like a hybrid approach, which in like the Go championship, the Alphabet Go championship, they used as well. You use a correctional first order logic correctional, something you actually know as a correction point, as a calibration point for your deep learned stuff. And then you can iterate the deep learned stuff. But you know when you're moving too far out, your tethering won't work. Your calibration won't work. You lose signal and you get noise. If you don't do that with the top down, you never know when you lose noise and you run into problems like Google did with Google FluTrend. Does that answer your question?
So from a business outcome perspective, is the idea here purely from an ROI perspective that as you build long-term relationships with customers that have affinity for your brand,
right,
the idea is those customers are more valuable over time, or your model is a better predictor of customers that would generate greater outcomes, greater revenue?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but yes, exactly. Building that relationship, we know when we benchmark it against standard. So this is the world of what our industry at least calls the earned media world. You all probably know the paid media world, where here you go to the gatekeeper, like a Gutenberg, run this ad for me, and that's the paid media world. You pay a channel, and this happens on social media as well, where companies just like, I'll pay you this much to put that ad in for, and then they would call after 2 weeks and say, can I take it down now? It really doesn't look good in my feed. That's when everybody's alarm bells should go off. It's like, that wasn't authentic. Clearly they don't want anything to do with this. This is paid media, right? This is just traditional paid media. We know that when we benchmark earned media and paid media in a like-to-like scenario, we can get up to 13x more value out of earned media than paid media. That's fundamentally big. I mean, that's a huge piece. And this is just going to get worse, because how many of you have ad blockers? How many of you have cut the cord? How many of you actually watch the ads that run on TV? Paid media is under tremendous stress because the old model is really, the millennials today don't like it. They don't like to be targeted and bombarded with meaningless or non-related ads. The good advertisers can figure out how to really segment and understand their population and then resonate. But it's all of this is about resonance, right? In the perfect world, you resonate with the group of people that you want to resonate with. But that requires you actually understanding and digging deep, and not stopping at the top 5,000 people on social media and going deeper. And building those longer relationship, we haven't done it long enough to actually, I can't tell you if what the 5-year lifetime value of a really good brand Soulmate is. But the indications we have right now are incredible. And we've done this for 7 years on the influencer side.
Yeah. Will you ever go to the consumer side, where the consumer can go to your site and say which brand is best for me?
There are a lot of really interesting ideas that are floating around. See, we're building a capability. What you can peel off from there is almost daunting, because when you have a confined, non-unlimited source resource pool, you need to very, very strongly focus. And we're trying to already bite up a huge nut. But so keeping ideas in some sort of a stream is hard. But yes, we can. We're building this not so much as a direct-to-brand platform. We're building this as a platform for all of the analytics companies and the data aggregators in this market to go into. We want to really empower that entire industry, not going after one-to-one. Because building platforms is awesome. And, BASF had this beautiful marketing slogan, probably like 10, 15 years ago. We don't make the products you use. We make the products you use better. We're trying to go that model. We cannot, I think, we'll be very pleasantly surprised, just like Twitter in the beginning was, by what people will do with it once they can get their hands on it. And we want to do it in a transparent and open way. Hopefully that keeps the bad actors controlled in some level.
So perhaps a more geek question. There's a lot of interesting technologies here that at JPL we've used them for quite a few years. And two-part question. One was, how hard was it to get did you have existing IT people that you had to train to use, for instance, graph databases? nothing really happened in databases for 40 years, and all of a sudden, it's exploding. So that's one. The second one, we had a hard time scaling Neo4j as this became popular, so we ended up going to other graph databases. Just if you can talk a little bit about the whole database side of it.
Yeah, so Neo4j is an interesting experiment for us because the writing's on the wall in terms of scalability. I mean, they're doing a lot on their platform, but we use it on a very base level, querying our database, our like fairly decently sized analytics cluster and data warehouse for time series slice of data, let's say, against Twitter. Your query will run for 4 days. It's obviously not acceptable. So the way we get around it, we offload everything into Spark, run it there, and then, but in Neo4j, we get that response in 15 seconds within boundaries. So it's, I think, in the old way, I would have thought, like, oh my God, how many computing languages does our team have to understand to do any of this? I'm no longer as scared about this. Everything that is moving data around is Python in our shop. Everything that has a user interface on it is Ruby and Angular. And that is different worlds, for sure, but you need to use the tools that are available for the job. We're not in a world where you can say, okay, I'll use this framework. Like, for a while in the late 90s, there were some 4GLs and super layer technologies, and it looked like we could all just use one thing. But today, I mean, we made a decision yesterday. We just implemented something 6 months ago. We just made the decision yesterday to rewrite it altogether because a new library came up, and it's way better. It's a very different way of running engineering than we did like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But you had a first part to that question before we got to Neo4j. People. We didn't. We started, I had I think that it was a complete privilege when I started at Eisenberg to be able to bring in people. And we brought in people from those sectors that had those experiences. We didn't have a group. We had 1 or 2 engineers, which are still on the team and are doing fantastic work. But all of these other areas, they were sourced in because we didn't have time to build like 2 years of experience in all of these sectors. We needed to purchase and source them in, which is hard to do even today in Pasadena, I have to say. It could be easier. I live in San Francisco. It seems a little easier up there. You just have to have a bigger purse. But there is more availability. But if you don't stress yourself out, if you say that you need to hire this person and you can give it 3 or 4 months and then really figure out the right person, it works. It's just a lot of effort. I tell you, when I built my last company in Pasadena in 2002 and 2003, that was almost impossible. So it's gotten way better. And Pasadena is now a really, really cool place to do this with JPL and Caltech and Art Center and so many great institutions around here.
Do you only take data input in English? Is it scalable to other languages?
Yes, so this is a really good question. A lot of this stuff is not translatable. What is translatable, for example, our knowledge tethering models, since they're based on Wikipedia, they're totally translatable, and we can do that. We can completely transfer the where question, where we built the network graph, into other languages. The psychometric piece, no way at all. There we already notice differences with dialects of English, where it has impact on personality. This is a real scaling problem that we see for ourselves.
It's interesting because Facebook has Pixel, which is very similar, and they're running into the same issue.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really interesting to see what else is happening. I have to say, something fundamentally changed, like from doing any really interesting engineering work late 90s, early 2000s. And it's starting in Southern California as well. It's just nowhere near where it is, for example, in the Bay Area. You have a problem, and that day you can find a meetup that deals with that problem. That is unbelievable. This is way better than Googling Stack Overflow. I mean, it makes a fundamental difference in how you operate. You send your engineers or your data scientists to coffee, and they come back with a solution. Because up there, you can go to Blue Bottle and say, anybody know why my Spark runs out of memory at this junction? And hands go up. Don't try that at Starbucks here. It's just not the same experience. But it's getting better. But this, like, being able to tag, because all of a sudden your engineering group is not like the 5, 6 people that you're working with. It's the 200-300 people that work at all of these other companies doing interesting and fun things. And in those meetups, people share. That's another thing where I've really found a big differentiator between Northern California and Southern California. The willingness to share and not demand an NDA, to just have a discussion. At the end of the day, execution matters, right? I mean, I don't think any of my ideas are big enough to, like, for somebody to overhear in a coffee shop and then, like, build a billion-dollar startup with. I don't have that feeling that my ideas are that good. So I have no problem discussing my ideas in a coffee shop and being overheard. It's easier. It's much easier. And that sharing of information, if we can do a little bit more of that in Southern California, I think that would be fantastic.
You talked about face-to-face, though.
Face-to-face. Actually, in the face-to-face is huge. Yes. All right. Am I totally out of time?
So I want to thank you, Kai, for giving us a very
Thank you.
interesting discussion, and here's a little gift from us.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.